why do people's construction costs go over budget or more than they plan when they do the initial estimate or cost plan when doing the project?
Yeah, I definitely think there's a lot of reasons that we see come up as to why things cost more than someone first thought. So one bit you mentioned there that I think's a big issue that people don't get done is actually have a cost plan or an estimate done at the start of a project, so they actually understand the costs involved with the full scope. A lot of people might think, oh, I know what this is going to cost, I've done something similar last year, but it doesn't work like that. People's scopes are different. Obviously, material costs change, labour costs change, different sort of feasibility of the site. So something like the site's ground conditions, anything unforeseen that you can't see could be adding additional costs if you're not doing the right thing. So for example, if you're not getting your correct ground surveys done or drainage reports and you come to excavate on the project, you could run in some big unforeseen costs. If you've got something like dewatering to do, you come across groundwater and you need to pump this away. Now, having the right things in place to prevent this as much as you can is going to be really important, so that the initial cost you've initially estimated actually is deliverable at the back end of a job. So that's probably one big reason there. What else would you think is another reason? Something like, say, like clients changing their mind. What about down this?
So with clients changing their mind, that typically comes under the variations. When a client changes the design of a project or they want to do some variations on site, typically they're not going to be decreasing the value in cost of what you originally agreed. It's always going to be an increase on site, whether that be putting a porch on the front of the house instead of just doing the double story extension, or they want to go down further in the basement. You know, all of these things, what the client wants under its variations, is going to increase the value in the project. And who's going to foot the bill? You know, you got on one side the client wants all these additional changes. The contractor doesn't want to foot the bill for these changes because they are different to what they originally agreed to. So there could be some sort of planning involved in which within the contract of where you have the adaptations on site, this needs to be known to the client straight away. Look, the contractor can't foot the bill for the variations. It has to go with the client, and typically that is all sorted out under the variation works when they arise on site.
Yeah, definitely. But right at the front end of the site, client might not understand the costs involved with that. So, oh, okay, you said it was going to be 150k, but now it's 175. Well, yes, because you've decided to change this, change that, add this in, and all of what looks nice. But it's important to understand sort of the costs involved with that, and the work involved in that as well. So something else important in there is making sure that you've got that contract in place to make sure both parties are protected and everything runs fairly, even down to sort of the contractor having subcontractor contracts. If that's needed in place to make sure sort of any specialist items or bespoke works are going through the right channels, this is also important. Understanding sort of where there's smaller demand or smaller availability for specialist works, understanding that their costs will change and they're bespoke and they're on a case-by-case basis is always important, so that the overall costs of the project are as predictable as they can be. The quote can get put in place at the front end. It's always important to get your quotes in at the front end, ensuring that anything that is a PC or provisional sum can be fixed to as good of a point as it can be. Because we see this all the time, right? We see sort of contractors say out their clients saying that there's too many PC sums, prov sums. Well, we need the design information and the spec to understand that.
Yeah, and it's a good point you mentioned on that PC and prov sum basis. They have to be as close to the fixed price as possible, what you deem to be the fixed price. There can be the variations in a shortage of materials in the economic circumstances, or there could be a shortage on labour. With specialist items, there's only a few people out there that can do certain things. And I think having that understanding from the outgo, you begin to build the bigger picture of the variations or the contract size or the contract numbers can change later on, and it's depending on who foots the bill. And I think it's a good point where you touched on earlier about the labour, because the labour aspect on a job, there could be, for instance, there's only a handful of thatchers in the country. There isn't a big amount of work necessarily for it, but because of the specialist work that are involved, they can put their prices up 50% more than some other people because they are specialists in what they do, and there's not many of them around anymore. So you've got to understand this during that stage. But again, getting fixed costs from the outgo or near enough as close to them fixed cost definitely eliminates any additional increases where they could be shortfall in.
Yeah, it's so important to get an accurate estimate right at the front end, because what we've seen before, people might do their own estimates or have sort of some guide costs in line, but if you're missing sort of even the smaller items, they all add up. So all the sundry items, all the extras, all the things that you might not necessarily think about whilst you're trying to rush through and get your project in to submit. And any of these little bits eventually all add up, and by the time you come to the end of the project, you can then see sort of your overall P&L, and you're seeing that, okay, I've lost a bit here, and here, which all could have been prevented at the start of the process, having the right documents in place as well. So how would you say we best sort of prevent that in terms of sort of contingency and planning at the front?
So I definitely think you've got to have within costs to the client, you've got to definitely build a contingency fee into your projects, whether that be 5% of the total allowance or up to 10%. Look, that money can be there and used by the client if needed. I think it's always good to build in this contingency to stop any shortfalls later on. You know the money can be there and can be utilised if required. You've also got to build in price and design risk. Yeah. Price and design risk is one of the biggest things that could go wrong with a project. You know, you can base it on the drawings, you can base it on the design you've been given, but you're not necessarily on site and doing that sort of thing at the same time. And that sort of builds into inflation figures, sort of when you've got price and design risk. Are the materials increasing as the design change? Are there different materials being used? This all incorporates into inflation costs.
Yeah, definitely. I think last thing there on price and design risk as well is when it's being built in, what if the design changes because of specialist input? So if at the forefront of the project you've got your guide estimate in place and you've put your prediction of what the architect's drawn up for the MEP, but once an MEP consultant gets involved and they've put their sort of expertise to the project and decided that a few changes are needed to the scope, where's the extra cost coming from there? Was it a PC sum? Was it a prof sum? Or does it need to be taken as price and design risk? So putting that little safety net on to account for sort of any of the changes that might come up due to specialist input is definitely important. And then like you said, right up until the end of the job, having inflation, are the team looking to get on site next week, or is the client looking to hold the project for the next 6 months? Because things like this can have a big impact on the overall costs, and it needs to be fairly taken into account for having inflation applied to the project or not having inflation applied to the project.
Yeah, and having the project being put on hold for a substantial amount of time, obviously with the increases on a yearly basis, 6 monthly basis, or even overnight. You know, we've seen prices go up overnight, especially after COVID. And them increases, typically, someone's got to foot the bill for them. And, you know, that typically goes down to the client, or it gets re-tendered as a project. If it's been tendered now and then it's not starting for another 6 to 12 months, them figures have to be looked at very closely towards the start date.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think overall, generally looking at how we best manage costs, manage project costs. So we see these things cropping up, but what do we do about it? So we might need to look into value engineering. Maybe we need to sort of substitute some of the initial materials that were mentioned for something different to save some money. Maybe we need to change the design slightly. So the overall objective is still served and the purpose for the client's there, but the projects value engineered to bring some of the costs down and therefore save some money on the project whilst maintaining, still delivering it to the same time frame. That's something that we need to do quite a lot of as well, and is an important factor in sort of managing project costs.
Yeah, and it's that type of work, value engineering, is definitely being increasing over the last year or so, where the architect's gone out and designed something, the client has approved that design, and it's gone in for tender, and they typically can't afford what they're asking for and what they believe is a lot less price. So therefore, when it comes to that tender stage, things have to start cropping out through value engineering or substituting products.
Yeah, I think understanding all of what we've gone over there is really important in maintaining and managing project costs to make sure they stick to the initial budgets and sort of outlined costs, all of which we're getting involved in day to day. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on.